everyone, and welcome to the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words, the show where every episode I talk to writers, editors, agents, and sometimes others from the publishing game to learn more about them and the work that they do. If you are a regular visitor to the show, you know I have been on a sabbatical for the last several months. And in my day-to-day world, I'm the editor-in-chief at a publication that covers the California State Capitol. And this being an election year, let's just say it has been a hectic and stressful time, and I just really needed to take a break. So that said, I'm thrilled to be back today. I'm back doing something I really, really love to do, which is to talk to authors about writing and publishing. As we all know, this is my game too. When I'm not chronicling the exploits of politicians and policy, I'm always busy writing my own stories, and I have great admiration for all of my colleagues. And so my guest today, Jason Powell, is one of the up and coming authors out there in the mystery genre. His debut novel, No Man's Ghost, introduces us to Charles Davids, a probationary, I know I was going to screw that up, New York City firefighter whose first week on the job coincides with that of a mentally disturbed man going through a divorce who moves from calling it fake fires to acting on the real thing. I read it, of course. It is a gripping, very fast-moving story that's not only a crime tale, but gives us a really insightful look into the lives of firefighters and the brotherhood of firefighters. And then, for me, that was really an ancillary benefit of this really cool mystery story. So, of course, Jason comes by that insight naturally because he's been a New York City firefighter for the last many years now, I think at least 8 or 9 years. He took time out of his busy schedule today to come here to share his story with us, or the insights into his story with us, both personally and No Man's Ghost. And I'm thrilled to have him here. So without further ado, Jason Powell, welcome to the Open Mic Writers in their Own Words. How are you doing today?
Very good. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Well, this is interesting. We met at, I think it was Left Coast Crime.
Yes, sir.
Gosh, it feels like it was a long time ago now. I think it was maybe only earlier this year, but I heard you talk about the book. It sounded intriguing. I went and got my copy, and I really, really loved it.
Thank
But
you.
for those who are not familiar, I gave it a little snapshot on it. But tell us a little bit more about No Man's Ghost.
So, No Man's Ghost follows Charles Davids, who's a probationary firefighter who's just graduated the academy. When the reader meets him, it's literally the day that he's going to his firehouse for the first day, and he's battling a little anxiety about whether or not he's actually ready for the job. You don't get out of the academy until you're ready, but passing tests doesn't necessarily prepare you for the real thing. So he's a little nervous about it. So he gets to the house and dealing with his anxiety. He's also dealing with being the new person in the firehouse, and in the fire culture, the being the new person is being the lowest on the totem pole, but everyone is the lowest on the totem pole. And the way the guys with time help him get used to it is by pranks and doing things that guys do, and and, and making him see that it's a fun atmosphere, not just a serious job. Unfortunately, though, the same week that he starts is the week that his firehouse is responding to a chronic false alarm call for a man who is trying to get back at his wife for rightfully punishing him for things that he did, and their two stories interact.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, this is the first in a series, correct?
Yes, sir. I'm working on book 3 right now.
Yeah, and that's the thing I wanted to. I understand that you've finished book two and you're working on book three now. When might we expect to see book two?
I don't know. That's a good question. So, No Man's Ghost was published originally by Polis Books, and Polis has since closed their doors.
Right.
So my agent, we're on submission now with book 2. No Man's Ghost has since been picked up by another publisher, Detora Books, which is a UK-based publishing house, and they are distributed in the US by Penguin. So it's going to be re-released by Detora in May of next year. but the contract was just for No Man's Ghost. So right now we're on submission with book two, and in the meantime, I'm working on book three. Book three and book four are, take place within the same 24 hours, or the end of book three and book four take place within the same 24 hours. So immediately when I finish book three, which should be probably by the end of this month, barring the edits and such, I'll start working on book four.
That whole process is so interesting to me, and I'm really glad that I'm catching you now in a way because this is really an illustrative point for aspiring authors. Which is a lot of our audience here are folks who are, somewhere in this, either still the dream stage of trying to become a writer or maybe deep into it. But it's such a changing, evolving field all the time. It feels like you're walking on quicksand a lot in this business because you just never know what's going to happen. Uh, yeah, I forgot it had been published by Polis. That had to come as quite a shock when Polis, essentially
It
pulled
is.
the rug out.
I gotta say, so this is my debut novel, and I'm learning a lot of this as I go along. When I met you at Left Coast, it was my first conference that I attended as a published author, and a lot of you all who have been to conferences before helped me out and gave me advice, and it was a very good experience. But the publishing, not but, period, the publishing process is not at all what I expected, or not at all what I understood it to be. I figured the hardest part would be getting an agent, and then everything else uh, falls into place. And that's sort of the case because all the additional hard parts is my agent's job. It's not really my job. But when we signed with Polis, I was excited. I was like, okay, now the process is done. I have an agent, I have a publisher, but then the publishing house closed for understandable reasons, and it starts all over again.
Yeah, it starts all over. It's funny too, because I know so many writers who have been very successful, maybe with a series or multiple standalones, but they've all been very successful. And then they have an idea that maybe their own agent doesn't like, and it goes nowhere. They've had to go out and find a different agent for that particular book or project, or the publisher that they've worked with and had all this success with will say, yeah, no. And then it feels like you're always, essentially one step away from having to jump into the pool and start
It's
the
such a
deep end and start all over again.
Yeah, it's such a weird process. Like I'm sure you've dealt with this, but like for instance, if we'll submit to a publisher or to an editor at a publisher, and they pass because they don't know where to put it on the shelf, they don't know specifically what genre this is. That to me, as a writer or as a reader, I would think that's not a huge problem. Like a book that's a well-told story that's well written, where where does it matter? But I understand as a publisher, you have to be able to sell this. You have to be able to say, this is who to compare it to. This is where it's going to go, where you would find it in the bookstore. But then the struggle becomes, I don't want to try and write to a genre. Do you know what I mean? I don't want to try and write for an editor. I want to write the stories that I want to tell. And the series that I'm writing now, honestly, I only heard the term crime fiction once it was submitted. I was in my head writing a thriller about these characters, and I didn't realize that thriller was such a big umbrella.
And it's a really valid thing for people to be aware of because so often, like I have a very good friend right now who is part of my critique group, and um, from the beginning, she's talked about her book in a certain way, and I've been more and more suggesting, maybe you should really rethink this as a YA thing. And I don't tell anyone what to do. I try to really be very careful how I present any kind of criticism to anybody. And and but I've said, man, this just feels so much more like a YA, not so much even for me as a reader, because I don't read YA enough to be like I'm some expert.
Right.
But I've been around the industry enough now to know how they're going to see it. And it's just something to be aware of because you may see your book one way, your story one way. If they see it another one, my manuscript right now that's out on submission, it's been on submission all year. And everybody because my agent shares all the feedback and everything that's coming back is super positive. And then there's always that but. Oh,
Right.
really well written, this, that, and all these things where you're like, okay, okay, but don't know where to put it on the shelf. Oh, the setting, it's not quite. Oh, and I'm really into this, but just don't think this or whatever. It's always one of those things where you're like, and they're all different. You're like, it is really, I've described this a lot as you're trying to shoot, hit a moving target with a blow dart from 500 yards. And that's what it feels like to me sometimes. So,
100%.
um,
Yeah.
well, I understand that your protagonist, Charles Davids, that name has special meaning to you. Do you mind sharing that story with us?
No. When I was a probationary firefighter, one of the guys in my firehouse who was the most, who was, I don't want to say the most, I don't want to be unfair, who had a big part in my training was named Michael Davidson. Um, a few months after I got a probation, he and I and the rest of the house went to a fire in our response area that was on the set of a movie, which is to say, a movie was it was in Harlem, New York, shooting in one of the buildings in our response area, and a fire started, and Mike passed away. Um, so my middle name is Charles. The probationary firefighter in the book in No Man's Ghost, he has my resume, so to speak. Like his family history is my family history, and he goes in as a single young firefighter, which is what I did. I gave him the last name Davids as a homage to Mike, just because I didn't want to use Mike's full name. Mike's full name is mentioned in the book. Um, a lieutenant who's sort of mentoring Charles David says that Mike Davidson, a friend of his, Mike Davidson, gave him advice, and that he tells the advice. And that advice that the lieutenant gives Charles David, Mike did give me. The advice is, when I was a probie, he told me, for the first 5 years that you're a firefighter, don't get fat and don't get married. And then after that, you have a great career and a great life, because after 5 years in the New York City Fire Department, you're at top pay. And after 5 years, you have experiences that will range from amazing to unbelievable. And after 5 years, you'll be an excellent cook, because as a junior guy in the firehouse, you're expected to do the meals. So after 5 years, you have a good pay, you have wisdom, and you'll have the culinary skills to impress a woman or a partner. So, so you'll be able to get married. And then if you're not fat, then you'll be attractive also.
Ah, man, that all sounds like wise advice.
It was good advice.
Well, I feel that being a firefighter is one of those professions, similar maybe to being an EMT or a police officer. My brother was a cop for 25 years, um, that foster a real camaraderie among the
100%.
people doing it. Because no matter how sincere someone like me is about trying to understand what you do, it's not really possible for us unless you're actually in that world day after day. It's very, I mean, you can empathize, you can try to understand, but you really can't truly understand that unless you're in it every day. And I want to be careful because I don't want to make a ridiculous comparison here,
No,
but to me, it's a little bit. We were talking about this a few minutes ago about writing. I think unless you're doing this all the time, you don't really understand how challenging and how chaotic and how different it is from what you thought it was going to be. How has the experience of being a firefighter helped shape you and prepare you for the world that you now are in as also as a writer?
I don't think that's a ridiculous comparison at all. Um, it's very, very apt. So I took Lee Child's masterclass, and in it, in like the fourth video or fourth chapter or fourth segment, he says that he doesn't 100% agree with the term "write what you know." He thinks more accurately it should be write what you are passionate about. So because you, Jeff, could do as much research as you can on firefighters, and you can talk to me and talk to other firefighters, and you can write a very good book about firefighting. Um, and you don't have to be a firefighter to do that if you're passionate about it. But the benefit of being a firefighter, I have a perspective that someone who's not won't have, and I can do the same research that the author can. As a new author, so when I went to Left Coast Crime um, as a debut author, and then every other conference that I've been to this year, meeting you all and knowing that you have gone through the same thing that I do with the imposter syndrome, with getting rejection letters and wondering if the last book that you've published is going to be the last book that you publish, or wondering if you should change your style, or wondering if uh, what you think is good writing is not necessarily good writing because the books that are doing well are not anything like the books that you're writing. All of that, I feel like you only get through it if you have the people to get through it with. Meeting you guys made me a lot more confident. Meeting other authors and meeting other people in the industry made me a lot more, gave me the strength, I think, to continue writing. I don't know that I ever would have been discouraged to the point that I would have stopped writing. I think I have the benefit of writing isn't so much the bread or the way I'm getting my income. If I never make a cent from writing, it's not going to affect me financially. The only reason why I want to be successful as a writer is so I can continue to keep writing. But as a fire, or to answer your question about my life as a firefighter, prepare me for it. I learned to lean on other people. I learned that there's no weakness in trying to learn from other people's experiences, or get strength from other people, because I think that makes me stronger.
How have your colleagues responded to your writing endeavors? You know, I think again, it's um, one of those things where because people in the kind of world you're in can be very, very, very focused necessarily on the thing that they do all the time. Um, do they see what you're doing and say, "Hey, no, that's really cool that you have this other thing," or is it, what is the response? How are they supportive? Do they rib you a lot and say, something else? I mean, how does that work for you?
So it's a bunch. It's predominantly guys. When I published No Man's Ghost, the commissioner was a woman, and she's a good friend of mine, and she's a reader and she's a writer, and she's very supportive. She might be the only person I know, and that's not true. She's like one of 4 FDNY members that I know that have actually read the book. When I had my book launch at Barnes and Noble in Tribeca in New York, um, this is I'll make this a quick story. I went to the Barnes and Noble that I always go to in Union Square, which is the flagship in New York City. I go there all the time. I bought 200 books from that location, at least. And so I went there and I asked them if I could do my debut there, and the reception wasn't great. They were like, "No, we only do celebrities. We need to guarantee 100 people." I was like, "All right." And so then we were able to do it at the Barnes and Noble in Tribeca, which was a beautiful location. And they ordered 100 copies of the book. I'm in a firehouse now that's part of the hazmat battalion. It's the 3rd firehouse I've been in my career, because I kept moving up. And so all of the firefighters that I ever worked with knew about the launch, and the Barnes & Noble in Tribeca ordered 100 copies of the book, and they sold 112. They had to order 12 online.
That's
I would
awesome.
say like 70 of those sales were firefighters, and I would say 65 of those 65 of those firefighters have not read the book. They're very supportive of it. To answer your question, they're very supportive of my writing career. They think it's cool. They like the idea of a firefighter representing them properly. Like, none of us watch. And with all due respect, I've never seen Chicago Fire, so I don't know how accurate it is. And Chicago is not New York, but we don't watch the shows, and we're not looking to write dramas about the fire department. Or I'm not looking to write dramas about the fire department that are, romances, or have sexy men sliding down poles, or cleaning the rigs with their shirts off, or anything like that. I'm writing about real life experiences because I think those are pretty interesting in and of themselves. And the guys are really supportive of it.
Now you've also I've noticed in your bio you make note that you held a lot of jobs before you became a firefighter. Um, and I think a lot of writers can relate to this. If you look at most writers' resumes, they've done, this cadre of a lot of times very random, disconnected things, things that are not necessarily connected to each other. Um, how did any of those jobs inspire what you do now? What role did that have in what you've become?
So, in when I was in high school, the elective I took was psychology because the teacher who was teaching it said that psychology would improve my character development, and she was 100% right, like understanding people. I think I was attracted to jobs that would put me around people. So the first real the first real job I had, I guess, was working in the insurance company, a title insurance company with my mother, and I loved it. And my coworkers were there; they were great, and I'm still friends with a bunch of them. But I didn't really want to work with my mother, so I moved on to Nine West, which is a women's shoe store, and I was working on 59th and Lexington, which is a very popular area and is huge. It's across the street from Bloomingdale, so there's a lot of tourists and a lot of locals. And then I got promoted to Fifth Avenue and 53rd, which is 90% tourists. I loved that. I was top sales in 59th and Lexington, and then I was third in sales at 53rd and fifth before I got promoted to manager. But the reason why I was so good at sales is because I love talking to tourists. I love talking to people that I wouldn't otherwise have an experience with. And I felt like it was giving me a way of making my characters three-dimensional and not all following the same mold. I love people watching, and I think sometimes people watching has a funny connotation or it sounds like creepish, but I feel like it allows you to create characters who feel real, even if they're side characters. And I was just having this conversation yesterday with someone about Game of Thrones. I love side characters having backstories. Even if the reader doesn't follow them for a long time, I like them being three-dimensional and fully fledged.
Absolutely. Um, so a lot of writers that I know talk about the struggle sometimes of actually getting an idea out of our head and onto the page in that clear, concise manner. I think a lot of us describe it as writers who hate to write,
Yes.
and I can relate to that so much. And I get paid to write words for a living, and there are times I really struggle. I come up with a million ideas, but getting focused enough to sit down and block out everything else and actually write can be just like nails on a chalkboard. Um, do you struggle with the actual act of writing, or are you one of those blessed folks for whom words just flow like water over the waterfall?
No, I don't think that I struggle with the act of writing. I don't think that I dread it. I dread editing. I can. I'm fortunate enough, so I have 9 years on the job, and um, so I'm not like Charles. I'm not a probie where I have to always find myself doing something. I'm in a busy house, and we're on a lot of calls. But when we're not, after we've eaten together, after we've cleaned the house, after we've done a little training, we're on our own time. So I have the benefit of being able to write while I'm at work, and it's to the point where I'll get into a flow, and I hate that the tones go up, and I have to go out and do my actual job because I'm writing so well. I can write, let's say on a very successful day, I'll write a 15-page chapter. I hate that I'm gonna have to go back and read it and edit it. The writing part is fine. The editing it's the part I dread.
Yeah. I, I can relate to that. Um, so No Man's Ghost contains a lot of stories that come from your day job, of course, as a firefighter. Um, I know folks who have worked in the prison system. Again, I know my brother was a cop for a long time. We probably both know Jim Latoile, who's a very successful author here, who worked in the California state prison system for a long time. I've known other, people in the military, whatever, and they'll always tell you privately there are stories they can never tell for a variety of reasons. Um, Do you have stories like that where you feel like, oh, I know I lived this, I know it happened, I know these things happen, but I either can't or don't want to put this into a story?
I think the only story, no, no, I don't think that there are stories that I lived that I don't, that I would not want to put in the story, or that I would not want to put in a book unless I felt like it wasn't my story. So if it was an experience that, in my view, centered around me, um, and I thought it served a purpose in the book, I would have no problem putting it. For instance, I wouldn't write a story about 9/11 because I wasn't on the job at 9/11. I felt like that would be disrespectful. I may know more about 9/11 than a non-firefighter, but it's still not my story to tell. I wouldn't write a story about what happened to Mike. I was at that fire. Him and I were friends, but that's not my story to tell. If I was in a fire and I got hurt, or if I was in a fire and it was a fatal fire for a civilian, I might have Charles experience that, something similar to that, for the sake of sharing what that feeling is like. Um, and I don't see that that's disrespectful. I wouldn't tell about, I wouldn't name the victims or anything like that. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if that makes sense.
Sure, absolutely.
Um, I don't, I don't, I don't see that there are stories that I wouldn't tell because I don't think that there's any real secrets involved in my experiences for me that are my experiences.
I want to ask a process question. Um, what has been the most valuable thing for you, do you think, in terms of honing your craft as a writer? Is there one or maybe a couple of things that have, but just from a pure process and the act of writing, really helped you become the best writer you can be?
I don't want to give a simplified answer, but I think it's reading. Um, and it used to be that when I was writing, I would only read the genre that I was writing in, so that I don't confuse myself or distort. But what I do now is I read something new all the time. I try not to read something that I've already read, and I just try and keep reading something new. And it's been a help going to these writers' conferences so I can read the books of the people that I meet. But I'm also looking to read the books of, um, the people that the world thinks are the best writers. Um, I read S.A. Cosby's, All the Sinners Bleed,
Yeah, I
and
just finished that.
that was
Great.
amazing.
Oh, God, he's such a good writer.
And I met him. I had a very good talk with him at Belchicon last month, and so I read. He inspired me just from our talk. I read his book, and I was more inspired. I took Lee Child's masterclass. I took Harlan Corbin's masterclass, and then I took, Walter Mosley's masterclass. And those three authors, even though they're all three acclaimed, are pretty different from each other. And so I feel like I want to keep myself learning. I want to keep exposing myself to what is popular, whether or not is something I consider good or not. I haven't found many that I don't consider good, um, but I feel like I'm only going to improve my writing by seeing what other people do that make themselves successful.
Well, you just answered a little bit of this question that I wanted to ask, because I was going to ask what writers inspired you or continue to inspire you. And I wonder if you ever think yourself about being an inspiration to others, and particularly young writers of color. In the thriller and crime and mystery genres in particular, we've talked about this a lot amongst ourselves out here, that the industry has not always been very welcoming to women or to writers of color. And certainly seeing more of both now. You mentioned Sean Cosby, who's absolutely one of the most fabulous writers in the world of any kind in this day and age. Wanda Morris and Kelly Garrett, so many really great writers of color now. Do you ever think about that maybe being an inspiration yourself?
I hadn't, but until BoucherCon. So at BoucherCon, I went, and that was the biggest conference I've been to this year. And there were a bunch of people. I was with Kelly Garrett and Sean Cosby, and a collection, I think, of 86 of members of Crime Writers of Color.
Mm-hmm.
And most of them have books out, or most of them have books in, at least on submission, or completed. And there were a few who are in the process of like querying agents, or looking to get their book on submission. And a good number of them are older than I am. And so I was at a panel. I was watching KT Nguyen speak, and so there were people around me, and someone asked me if I was a writer or if I was just a fan. And I said, no, I'm a writer. And she asked what book I wrote. And then she said, do you have an agent? And I said, yes. And she asked where I got my agent. And I told her about manuscriptwishlist.com. And then everyone around us turned around and started like taking notes. And then they started asking me questions about the writing process. And I felt surprised because they were all older than me. And not that there's any correlation, but in my head, I just felt like I'm the new person here because this is my debut. This is my first time coming to BoucherCon. This is my first time. This year is the first year I'm going around for my book. Like if I feel like I'm the new person in this setting, but for those handful of people, I'm where they want to be, and I felt very good. If it was a very good feeling to be able to tell them what I did to get to where I was and to be an inspiration to them. That was the first time I felt like I can be an inspiration.
Well, that's really great. And I'm going to give myself a little shameless plug here because
Oh, please.
I've had many members of Crime Writers of Color on the show. So if you haven't read Ed Amar, or you haven't read Tori Eldridge, or you haven't read Wanda Morris, or Richie Narvaez, or folks like that, Gigi Pandian. I mean, I really, really strongly encourage anyone watching or listening to this to go to the Crime Writers of Color site. If you just don't know where to start, there's a ton of great authors there. They cover lots of genres, and they're all within crime, and they're so good. If you haven't discovered them, I really, really urge you to go do that. Gosh, Sheena Kamal, I could just go on and on. A lot of them have
Wanda
been on this show. Check them out if you want to learn a little bit more about them that way. But I really, really recommend you doing that if you have that opportunity.
Wanda Morris, I met her when I met you. I met her at Left Coast,
Mhm.
and um, she wrote a book on air property, and I read it, and I was so discouraged by how well she wrote that book. I was like, I should just stop. I don't want to do this anymore.
I believe me. I feel you. When that's how I feel. I'm reading Sean Cosby. I'm like,
Yes,
this must be like when you're learning to play an instrument, and then you listen to Jimmy Page or Beethoven or something, and you're just like,
exactly.
I'm done.
If I
Never.
hadn't had the conversation I had with Sean Cosby, I would have hated. I would have been very discouraged by his book. I would have like, because he was honest about how he began, and how it was a struggle for him. And for me, he's like the height of success. You know what I mean? Like he may not be J.K. Rowling or Stephen King as far as recognizable names yet, but I haven't met anyone who's read one of his books who hasn't loved it.
Well, yeah. I mean, he has found he has found a path where not only is he a great writer, he's a relatable writer.
Yes.
And I felt the same way about Walter Mosley. I've read almost everything Walter Mosley's ever
Same.
done. I felt the same way about Tony Hillerman. Those are the two writers that made me think I wanted to try writing myself at some point. I've been a reporter for a long time, but to write fiction, people like that just, and now I feel that way when I read T. Jefferson Parker or Craig Johnson or but yeah, Wanda, they're so skilled because to me they're relatable. And honestly, Jason, this isn't blowing smoke thing, but I really got a sense of that too when I was reading No Man's Ghost. It's one of the reasons I got excited about the book because yet there's a very human aspect to your writing. Um, and while I mean, obviously, you're a very good writer, it is something that I think um, we connect with as readers, right? Because it feels like a story, like we're having something shared with us by our next door neighbor or by somebody who understands us too, is not talking over our heads, is not talking past us, who is sharing something relatable. And it's a gift, man. It's a
That
real
is
gift.
the that. Thank you. That's one of the best compliments I received. That's exactly that's almost word for word how to describe how I want my writing to be. For me, Walter Mosley, Donald Westlake, and um, now I would add Sean Cosby to that list. And her name is escaping me, but it feels like being told a story by a friend or being told a story by a coworker. You know what I mean? It doesn't feel like someone's writing a book or writing something to be read. It feels like you're just listening to someone tell a story. And I love that feel. And that's the feel I want when I read, and that's the feel I want when readers read what I write.
Well, so far, I will say you're on track.
Thank you.
I mean, and I mean that very sincerely. You know, this is so hard. This is such a hard thing to do. And it's hard if you're really committed to doing the thing you want to do as opposed to maybe what an agent or an editor or somebody in the anybody else is telling you to do. Because we all want to tell stories because they're inside us, right? And it's very difficult sometimes with the industry. If you're listening on the podcast, not watching online, I'm making air quotes because the industry just beats the hell out of you in so many ways because they're trying to sell something. And
Yeah.
that's been the dialectic between art and commerce forever, right? What the creator wants and what the seller wants are often they don't always jibe. But anyway, I only have one more serious question and then I'll wrap
Yeah.
this up and let you get on your day. But I want to ask, um, routine is such an important part of being a successful writer. You don't have a normal 9 to 5 job. So how do you maintain a writing routine around a job where you're on for 24 hours at a time? I know there's times where you're not doing a whole lot, but then when you are, you're really busy. Are there times when the events of that day, maybe something very stressful, just keep you from your routine, or are you able to maintain that routine and block out maybe those things? I mean, how does that work for you in terms of building a writing routine?
It's been difficult. I told myself so. I told myself at the end of every day, no matter if I'm home or if I'm at work, I am going to pray and I'm going to write. And I'm going to give myself 1,000 word um, minimum. And that only lasts like 3 days. And I mean, the praying I can do every night, but the 1,000 word minimum. What I found was on like the second day, I was so exhausted, and I reached 1,000 words, but the next day I had to get rid of most of it. It was forced. So what I do now is I don't hold myself to a time of day or a word count. I just try and sit down and write every day. Um, Someone made a comment at the Bay Ridge, I'm sorry, the Bay Area Book Festival I attended. They said about writers being the only profession where they give themselves an excuse not to do their work by saying that they have writer's block. And whereas I feel like that's unfair, the point that they made that I agree with is if you take out 40 hours from the work week, from your week for work, you still have 160 hours left in the week. It's not um, too much to ask to take an hour each day, so 7 hours from that 160 to devote to writing, to sit down to devote to writing, even if you don't get any writing done. So that's what I do. I give myself an hour every day that I have to do nothing but writing. If nothing productive comes out, then I'm just sitting there in front of the computer. But I'm not doing anything else. I'm not looking at my phone. I'm not checking email. I'm just in front of the computer. And since I started with that, which was in May, there has not been a day where I haven't done an hour writing, at least.
It's really good. I mean, so much of success is training your mind to block out distractions. And we are in a time when we are nothing but distractions. I mean,
So yeah,
oh my God. I mean, we're walking around with these incredibly powerful little personal computers in our pockets everywhere we go. And that, I mean, that's great. We have more information at the tip of our fingers than any time in human history. And that's great, except it can also be the biggest distraction in the world. I mean, it's
yeah,
so challenging sometimes, like say just the phone, to put down the phone, stop, because now it's one-stop distraction shopping, right? You can, it's your phone, it's your map, it's your alarm
everything.
clock, it's your news source, it's everything, and it's right there in front of you, calling your name. Jason, get away from the computer, come, check out Facebook.
I put my phone one of these days. I put my phone on do not disturb, and it's synced with my laptop, so they were both on do not disturb. And I was writing, and I was in a good groove, so I wrote for like maybe an hour and a half of straight writing, and then I got up to eat, and I looked at my phone, and I had all these notifications about the assassination attempt on Trump, and I was like, "What? How did this happen? I just had my phone on. How did this happen?" But to your point, yes, this world is big with distractions now, so it's not hard. I mean, it's not easy, but I had a conversation with my agent once, and she didn't. She's the most supportive person in the world as far as writing. She encourages you where it feels like you want to write, not like saying you have to do this. But something she said in passing, and not as a condemnation, is no one is forcing us to write. So if we don't want to spend any time writing, we don't have to. But then we're not going to be published authors.
Right, right,
You
right,
know.
right. Well, yeah, just was one real quick thing, and I'll ask this last question. But
Yeah.
I was on a camping trip when that happened, and somewhere out of cell phone range, and as we're leaving the mountain, all of a sudden my phone just starts pinging and pinging and pinging and pinging. And of course, as a news guy, my first thought is, oh shit, something really big has happened. And then
Yeah.
instantly my phone rings because my daughter and her husband were in the car behind us. Immediately she's calling, someone tried to assassinate Trump. And I go, okay, well now I know why my phone's blowing up here. And it's just like, and I made the joke. I said, damn it, people, I can't leave you alone for 2 days without everything going to hell. I can't even go
Exactly.
take 2 days and be away from my phone without everything just going to hell here. Come on, give me a break. So
Ridiculous.
anyway, so I like the regular my regular audience knows I like to end the show on a fun question, and I mean this to be a fun question. I hope it is. So I'm going to give you, let's say I'm this omnipotent being, I have the power to put you together with one of these three people. Who would you choose and why? And there is a little bit of a through line here. You will probably pick it up fairly quickly, but if not, I'll tell you at the end. But there is a through line here. Which one of these three people would you choose and why? The three options I will give you are the great actor Steve Buscemi, uh, Catherine O'Leary, who is maybe more famous for her cow, and Deanne Schulman, who I'm not going to tell you who that name is. Well, I will. I will just say she's got a similar connection to the other two. Um, that's probably not fair. That doesn't really get. She was the first female smoke jumper in America. So,
So before you told me who she was, I would have said Steve Buscemi. And I met Steve Buscemi at the Friends of Firefighters banquet last year in December, just in passing. And I felt like because he was a celebrity, there was a line of people who wanted to meet him. But he is, as you know, a retired FDNY firefighter, and then for 9/11 he came back and helped as a firefighter. I would just want to hear that experience. But to be the first female smoke jumper, so we FDNY doesn't do wildland fires because we don't have wildlands. Um, but I'm part of the incident management team with FEMA, which we get deployed to California or wherever there are wildfires to help as far as management. But we had to take that training, and then to the FDNY has 10,000 firefighters, and um, not 1,000 of them are women. So I'd be interested, one, to hear her experience in that field that I'm learning about but not completely familiar with, and then two, to feel how it feels to be the first. The first anything is pretty big, right? but to be the first female in the male-dominated profession, I would love to hear that story.
Well, I admire that pick. My wife is an engineer, and I again, longtime listeners have heard this story before, so I'm really sorry you're going to hear it again because I'm super proud of her. My wife works for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The Corps has a handful of these technology centers around the country. They started up mostly after World War II. None of them have ever had a female director until April of this year, when my wife became the very first woman in the history of the Corps to be a director of one of these big technology centers. It's a very high profile, high stress thing because there's two main ones. One of them is here in our town, the other one's somewhere in Mississippi. But none of them have ever had a female director until now. And so she's got a lot of people under her. She's got to deal with DC and all that stuff all of the time. And there's the wall of photos in that agency is one old white guy after another, and then her. So I'm
It's interesting, and this is why this is why it's my choice for your wife too. That is an important job, no matter what your gender is an important job. So if you get that position, if anyone gets that position, they have to deal with the nerves and the stress of that job. Now, on top of that, she has to deal with the being the first of something.
Mhm.
I would love to hear about how someone copes with that, or if they even think about that at all.
Yeah, it's been an interesting about 6 months now. She's doing great. And I'm with you, man. It is hard being the trailblazer in anything, but she's got the makeup for it, so that's really great. But anyway, Jason, I really want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to come chat with me about writing and about No Man's Ghost. And I wish you all the luck in the world, of course, finding a home for the rest of the series. I'm sure you will. Any publisher who's paying attention at all should know that, as I noted in our intro, you are really one of the up and coming rising stars in this field, and I know you'll be a great success. So thank you so
Rich, I
much for coming
appreciate
on the
it.
show today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. Well, I will say to the rest of you out there, I hope that you will hit subscribe. I hope that you've enjoyed the show enough to hit subscribe. Maybe tell a friend, tell somebody if you have a friend or a colleague who's interested in writing, wants to know a little bit of something about the business, learn something about Jason Powell and his books. Check
And
us
about
out.
Rich's work.
Yes, leave me go to jasonpowell.com. Uh, check a nice 5-star review for me. Help other people find the show. Tell somebody about it. That'd be great. All that stuff is good. I'm going to leave you with one last thing, though. It's the same thing I always leave you with, which is this: tomorrow is not promised to any of us. So please, whatever you do, make today count. For my guest Jason Powell, for myself, Rich Eisen, this has been the Open Mic Writers in Their Own Words. I will see you next time.